And I'll explain it as follows. Section 2 of GIAMA says that the Act applies to an organ of state. And for that definition of organ of state, there's a cross-reference to Section 239 of the Constitution. But Section 239B of the Constitution expressly excludes Parliament as an organ of state for that purpose. There's also another clue. Section 14 of GIAMA says that the functions of an accounting officer of a user, and the definition of accounting officer incorporates by reference the Public Finance Management Act. And the Public Finance Management Act expressly says it does not apply to Parliament. So in its engagement with the ad hoc committee, DPI has said it treats the villages as if it is falling within GIAMA, but also acknowledged that at the moment, the management of villages the management of the assets within the villages are not GIAMA compliant. When the Office of the Secretary to Parliament addressed the committee, they also pointed out that the way the relationship between a custodian and a user at present is that it allows the custodian to determine how the assets are going to be managed. The custodian can determine how budgets are going to be prioritized and what the standards or the specifications of the finishes in the respective villages will be, without the Act requiring due consideration of the inputs of Parliament in its current role, which it is being treated as a user. Okay. So if we step away from the legal framework, we move on to the policy framework. The first one I would like to introduce is the Memorandum of Agreement that has been signed between the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure and the Secretary to Parliament as recent as February 2026. So you will see that's after the committee came into existence as well. So this Act governs the provision of housing for designated support staff in designated accommodation. I'll address this briefly because when we get to the recommendations for legislative development, honourable members will see we borrow quite heavily from some of the definitions within the Memorandum of Agreement. But for now, safe to say that the designated support staff is defined in the Memorandum of Agreement to mean political support staff, parliamentary support staff, and aides to members with disabilities. Designated accommodation is defined as Acacia Park, Pelican Park, Laboria Park, Sunrise Villas, and any other property designated by the Minister. So what are the objectives of the Memorandum of Agreement? It's to provide equitable and appropriate housing for designated support staff, to establish clear roles and responsibilities for housing allocation, occupation and management, to ensure rental agreements for the designated support staff align with applicable policies and market practices, to facilitate collaboration between the parties, and to sustain operational continuity pending a long-term policy. So the Memorandum of Agreement was necessitated as an interim arrangement subject to the amendment of the Act that is before us. The need for the Memorandum of Agreement arose because of differing views in respect of the categories of persons who may lawfully reside in the villages. DPWI's reading of the Act says that the provision of accommodation is limited to parliamentarians and sessional officials, and they come to that view based on the definition of parliamentary villages, not based on the definition of residents, because that is absent from the Act. Parliamentary Legal Services had a slightly differing view in saying that there is a way that the Act can be interpreted to actually accommodate support staff of political parties and support staff of Parliament office bearers when you look at what the purpose of the provision of the housing should be. But even legal services opinion acknowledges that in the absence of a clear statutory prescript on the categories of persons who may lawfully reside in the villages, that creates legal and governance risks for all parties. The Memorandum of Agreement makes provision and establishes a Housing Oversight Committee, which is tasked with overseeing the implementation of the Memorandum of Agreement. And it is comprised of representatives from Parliament and from the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. So it...
Yes, Ms. Gobe.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, we don't have the same presentation as Ms. Annika. Maybe if we can have an updated version sent to us in the WhatsApp group or in our emails.
Okay, the Secretariat will please attend to that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I remember it is just this one slide. When I did my dry run this morning, I thought this might be, so I can assure me it is only slide 27. Of understanding stipulates that the housing allocation framework in relation to the designated staff, it sets it out very precise. So the department will allocate 46 housing units to the villages, with 30 of those being within the parliamentary villages and 16 being within Sunrise villages. And those are allocated in a broadly proportional manner. So each political party is assigned one housing unit, and members will recall that was one of the inputs members have made, that we should have at least thresholds for parties who does not, in terms of a proportional presentation, might not otherwise be eligible for one housing unit. So each political party is given one housing unit, and the remaining housing units are then divided up proportionally. The Memorandum of Agreement is in operation for the current parliamentary term, with either Parliament or the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure being able to terminate the Memorandum of Agreement with 90 days notice. And that is the inherent weakness in the Memorandum of Agreement versus a legislative amendment. The fact that parties can unilaterally terminate it without, for example, the requirement for legislative process of public participation, impact assessments, or deliberations within a parliamentary committee. And also that it can be terminated with as little as a 90 days notice. The second policy document we will look at is the Parliamentary Villages Rules, Conditions and Information. The rules were developed to be applicable to parliamentary villages and the residents. So the rule stipulates that the DPWI administers the villages. So in that way, the rules attempt to fix one of the shortcomings in the Act, in that the Act does not assign the responsibility of administering the villages to anyone. The rules also assign the function of representing residents and liaising with the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure to the Residents Committee. Again, that's a way to fix the absence of a function assigned to a Residents Committee as it currently is in the Act. The Villages Rules expressly states that in residents, the needs of Parliament take precedence over the sessional officials. So the parliamentary rules covers issues like access control, rules applicable to visitors, both daily visitors and overnight visitors. It also talks to issues of upkeeping of furniture, carpets, fittings, etc. within the villages. In the next slide, I'll talk to some of the rules that are not currently being enforced. But the lack of enforcement is in part due to reported capacity constraints on the part of DPWI. For example, a lack of capacity in making sure that only people who are properly authorized to stay within the villages stay there. Also capacity constraints on the part of SAPs, for example, in relation to the way that access to the villages are currently being undertaken. The lack of enforcement is also due to the shortcomings in Rule 4 of the villages rules that talks to residents' complaints. So Rule 4 in the villages rule says when there's a complaint, it must be directed to the residents' committee for resolution and inquiry. Now, we have a problem because neither the Act or even the villages rules empowers DPI, DPWI on its own to inquire into residents' complaints and to follow the process for resolving residents' complaints. But also at another level, there's an issue of the protocol in the relationship between DPI officials within the executive addressing members of parliament within the legislative sector on issues of residents' complaints. It will present a difficulty to officials. It's definitely not a position I would ever want to be in, honorable members. So DPWI has acknowledged that the village rules are updated, having not been updated in more than 2 decades. So DPWI does not defer to the rules for many of the items contained in the rules. So one such example being that the residents are charged a flat rate service levy as opposed to 1% of a person's annual basic salary that the rules stipulate. So there's a number of rules that's aimed at securing the villages that are also not currently being forced. So residents are, for example, required to obtain vehicle permits from SAPS in terms of the rules. Domestic workers working within the villages are supposed to obtain security clearances. That's not happening. Tenants are not allowed to accommodate lodges during, that's festive seasons. Housing or flats may not be subletted, and no holiday makers are allowed to rent accommodation in the villages. So now stepping into the residential environment of the villages. So at Pelican Park, we have 108 residential units established in 1984. Acacia Park, established in 1982. Laboria Park, established in 1985. So all the villages have existed longer than I've been alive. The Tefla Group has been appointed as the facility manager's contractor to undertake both corrective and preventative maintenance at the villages. They've been appointed in April 2022 for a 5-year period. So what does occupancy in the villages currently look like? So the following categories of person currently reside in the villages. You have sessional officials. So accommodation is provided for sessional officials on the strength of a DPSA policy directive of sessional officials. And that policy directive is to give effect to a bargaining service coordinating council resolution that says staff who temporarily perform duties in Cape Town must be provided with sessional assistance. You have parliamentarians being both members of the National Assembly and the NCOP. You have support staff of political parties, support staff, parliament support staff, including staff appointed to support parliament office bearers, and aides appointed to assist MPs with disabilities. We also have a conundrum in persons who are no longer parliamentarians, but have refused to vacate the residential units. DPWI have confirmed that those former parliamentarians have been issued with eviction notices, and via the state's attorney, DPWI has appointed counsel in the matter to proceed to court to initiate legal proceedings. You also have DPWI standby officials to provide support to residents in emergencies outside of working hours. You have DPWI Regional Security Manager, whose intended role is to provide support to SAPS at the villages, And then only at Pelican Park, we have domestic quarters that provides accommodation to 8 domestic workers. So what does occupancy in the village look like? So on the second column, we have the population norm. And then the column right next to us is the actual number of persons living there. So if members allow me, so your population norm looks at the amount of people who may stay within the villages. So it's not the amount of units that's within the villages. So if, for example, Acacia Park, if we say that the occupation is currently at 22.6%, we're not saying 22.6 of the units are occupied. What that means is if a house, for example, can accommodate 3 people and only 1 person stays in there, you will say the occupation of that unit is 33.3%. So of the 1,984 population norm in Acacia Park, it's currently at 22.6% occupancy, but the actual number of residential units are 92. But of that 92, we must put 50 aside. DPWI has indicated that when the demolition of the prefab units is going to take place, we need to reserve units for the decanting of those occupants. In Laboria Park, of a population norm of 260, we have 78 occupants and 3 vacant units. Pelican Park, of the population norm of 432, we only have 80 residents, so it's 18.5%, but the actual number of vacant units within the park is 8. DPWI has reported on challenges in completing the 25-26 occupancy audit, largely because of residents not being present or available at the residence to do the verification. Yeah. When we look at service charges or rental charges to residents, it's as tabulated below. So bachelor units will range from 182.38 to 4-bedroom units, 207.38 for members. Parliament staff or party staff are accommodated only in bachelors or 1-bedroom units ranging from 1,277 to 1,477. The DPWI standby officials that's housed in the villages, they get charged a flat rate of 900 Rand. And for the 8 domestic workers at Pelican Park, they get charged 8 Rand per month, although DPI has confirmed that that rental is not currently actually being collected. Health and safety within the villages. DPWI reported that all in the villages are compliant with all applicable health and safety, building and built environment legal prescripts, with the exception of 112 prefabricated houses located under the located in Acacia Park that has asbestos within the structures. A project to demolish and refurbish those structures has been initiated and is reported to currently be at bid adjudication stage. And that project will also include rerouting the sewage line in Block E. So the challenge there being that the blockages originate outside of the park. So interim solutions have included TEFLA attempting to unblock pipes, but also the City of Cape Town deploying what we commonly refer to as honeysuckers to empty sewage lines. Also, falling under health and safety, Parliament had requested DPWI to identify space for gym facilities at Pelican Park. So the arrangement was that DPWI would make the space available and Parliament would then furnish the gym equipment. What we have instead now is gyms that for more than 10 years, Honourable Chair, has stood empty. The provision of transport services. So yes, the transport services, it's currently provided by DPWI and not by the board as empowered to by the Act. So that's provision of transport from villages to the parliamentary precincts and also to school for the dependents of the residents. The current transport service contract comes to an end in August 2026. And members have even mentioned that that would be an opportune time for the board to take back its function in terms of transport division when that contracts have to be renewed. The transport tariff was determined by National Treasury, and it is included in that rental amount that I've listed in the previous column. So the most recent adjustment to those transport tariffs took place in January 1998, where the levy was set at 127 Rand per annum. So I don't think anyone will argue if you say that that determination is outdated. Quick looking at capital and operational expenses in the villages. So no capital projects have taken place at the villages for the past 5 years. There was a renovations project which would fall under operational expenditure for the period 2021 to 2025, where renovations was undertaken at 246 MP residents. Looking forward to the MTF, amounts have been set aside for backup supply to both Acacia Park, Pelican Park, and Laboria Park, and also for the demolition of the prefabricated structures. Safety and security at the villages. The SAPS Protection and Security Services Division is responsible for ensuring safety and security at the villages. SAPS has pointed out that the scope of the risk management support system, the REMIS, currently as adopted by Cabinet, does currently actually not include the villages. And members will recall during an oversight visit, we were told that previously there was a long process of considering, okay, should it actually fall under private security? But then there was movement away from that. The most recent security assessment undertaken at the villages was completed in March 2020. And SAPS did say that after that security assessment, the DPWI did implement some recommendations. So the perimeter fences, for example, the height was increased. There are ever outstanding security infrastructure issues which have not been implemented. So perimeter fence that should be enhanced with intruder detection systems, for example, electrical fencing, beams, CCTV coverage, that the CCTV coverage must be expanded to cover the whole perimeter, including the access and the egress points. The intercom communication must be repaired or replaced at villages, at the residents for easy accommodation, and that monitor rooms should be established at all villages. So to date, those have not yet been implemented. During our oversight visit, SAPS also briefed the committee on other safety and security risks that persist at the villages. Criminal activities over the past 12 years emanating from within villages and the school. In fact, Honorable Chair, when SAPS reported on the criminal activities from the school, I was quite surprised to learn that it is a primary school when we then went onto the tour of the actual villages. Increased access requests from e-hailers, so your Mr. Delivery, your Uber, where the drivers often do not have the necessary valid forms of identification. SAPS also reported on criminal cases which are not being registered for all suspected crimes. An example was given of a suspected case of arson, where suspects appeared to be known, but were never cautioned. More alarmingly, there's an informal settlement near Acacia Park that is increasing in size, that's presenting an increasing safety and security risks. So SAPS and DPWI did undertake an on-site visit, but they will need to secure an undertaking from City of Cape Town to remove the unlawful occupants, and thereafter DPWI can then fence off the area to prevent recurrence. Lastly, when it comes to occupancy in the villages, Chair, when we went to Pelican Park, we toured the domestic quarters. And I think it's strongly worded enough to say that the conditions were deplorable. You would be mistaken for thinking that you walked into a hijacked building in Joburg CBD. And definitely where Parliament becomes the custodian of the assets, with the values that Parliament have of being a people's parliament, Chair, that is not living conditions that can persist. DPI reported that the maintenance of the domestic quarters is the responsibility of the domestic quarters, of the domestic workers, and therefore DPWI does not assign any budget to maintenance at that quarters for that purpose. In 2009, the Department of Labor was on site for inspection and found the working conditions to be non-compliant to labor law. So then already the requirement was said that domestic workers who work within the villages must be registered with the Unemployment Insurance Fund. That was in 2009. At the date of this report today, Chair, those domestic workers have not yet been registered with the UIF. Just take a sip of water. Next, we'll talk about the comparative analysis and political party surveys that the committee has undertaken. So surveys went out to all political parties, as well as all provincial legislatures within South Africa, 3 international parliaments. However, only the Canadian House of Commons provided responses to the surveys. So bearing in mind that participation in research is always voluntary, we do appreciate the responses that we got. We were most interested in the question, does your legislature provide accommodation for support staff of political parties and for parliament support staff? So the legislatures that did respond, Gauteng Provincial Legislature and Western Cape Provincial Parliament, as well as the Canadian House of Commons, responded that they do not make accommodation for either support staff of political parties or support staff or parliament office bearers. So we then said, okay, because we do not have any, can I call it, forerunners, we then design surveys for political parties to say, okay, so what is the need and the priorities that would be met should your support staff be accommodated within Parliament? And what do you think the eligibility criteria should be? So we received responses from the African National Democratic Party, the African National Congress, the African Transformation Movement, Build One South Africa, Democratic Alliance, Freedom Front Plus, Inkatha Freedom Party, and the Economic Freedom Fighters. Of those parties, 6 completed the survey, and of the 6 that completed the survey, 4 ranked maintaining a household outside of Cape Town as being the most important eligibility criteria. So we asked, for example, should we be looking at years of service or post-level as an eligibility requirement? But there the responses were so varied. So years of service as an eligibility requirement ranged from 3 months to 5 years, for example. So because of that variability in the other eligibility criteria, one would think, okay, maybe it's best to leave it to political parties to exercise their discretion. So we have the minimum eligibility criteria in being ordinarily resident outside of Cape Town, but then any other eligibility criteria political parties ought to then design. So we've said the objectives of the Act is not that clear. So we asked political parties, okay, so what would be the motivation for accommodating staff of political parties within Parliament villages? And the responses was to accommodate those persons who would otherwise have to carry the costs of maintaining 2 households, increase responsiveness to the political parties and office bearers they support, and supporting staff of political parties and staff supporting Parliament office bearers in accessing affordable and conducive housing and amenities. Then we asked about housing unit allocation criteria. So we asked political parties, what factors do you think should inform the number of units that are made available to each political party? So we said, okay, the first option was it should be proportional. The number of units made available should be proportionally divided between political parties. The second option of the number of staff members who are eligible should be proportionally divided. And the last one is there should just be a uniform percentage. So we should say, for example, 50% of all political party staff may be accommodated. The bulk of the responses was in favor of proportional allocation of the available units. So those being FOSA, Freedom Front Plus, African National Congress, and the Democratic Alliance. Okay. We're nearing the end. So the committee then has to look at taking all of the information before the committee into consideration. What is the assessment of the functioning of the Parliamentary Villages Board? The most recent board was appointed for the period March 2025 to March 2026. The Act itself does not stipulate the term of the board, but DPWI has interpreted Section 2 sub B to mean that the term must be 1 year. They come to that interpretation because that section says that the persons who serve on the board must be elected by the Residence Committee annually. So the approach is the term of the board cannot be longer than the term of the persons appointed to serve on it. The previous board was appointed in July 2020 and served until November 2022. So for period 2022 until 2025, there was no functioning board. In fact, Chair, on the interpretation of DPWI, the term of the existing board has also come to an end. So again, we sit in a situation where there's no properly appointed board. So it's clear that the necessary measures are not in place within DPWI to ensure that the new board is appointed before the term of the previous one expires. Section 2(5) of the Act empowers the board to frame rules governing its quorum, etc. No such rules have been developed by the board. DPWI has said that the previous board delegated one of its members to draft rules on quorums, procedures at meetings, and its conduct. However, those were never adopted. The board is not providing transport services as empowered to do so in terms of Section 3(1)(a) of the Act. Instead, DPWI has contracted a service provider, and DPWI is responsible for contract management. So DPWI took over the function as a result of the fact that there were periods where the boards were not fully functional and couldn't execute that function. The board has no clearly defined roles and responsibilities in respect of financial oversight over budgeting and expenditure on operations at the villages. In practice, the board is expected to draft and ratify annual financial statements prior to submission to the AGSA, but the board has not finalized annual financial statements since the 2012-2013 financial year. The board reported that one of the reasons for the consecutive years of financial statements not being adopted is that boards are reluctant to adopt annual financial statements for periods that they were not serving on the board. DPWI did in January 2016 recently appoint a panel of service providers that have been tasked with compiling annual financial statements for the year subsequent to 2012-2013. And the DPWI Chief Audit Executive will assist in this process. So if you look at best practice governance reports, looking at the King reports and contemporary functions of boards, the powers and functions, the functions of a board should ideally be as follows. They should have policy and governance functions, which the board is not assigned in the Act. They should have financial oversight functions, strategic planning functions, accounting and reporting functions, and decision-making authority. None of this is provided for in the Act. In fact, when the survey to political parties went out, we also asked political parties, what is your view on expanding and specifying the functions of the board? And political parties were presented with these functions, and with the exception of one political party, there's consensus that the board should have all of these governance functions. It's opportune to at the same time also talk about the residence committees. Again, No function has been assigned to it in the Act. Again, looking at contemporary governance norms, the function of your residence committee is ideally to represent the interests of your residents. So you look at residents advocacy, resident engagement, operational input, communication, welfare and support. Again, when the survey went out to political parties, we asked, do you agree that these should be the representation functions of the residence committee? And all political parties was in favor of these functions. So what is the committee's assessment of DPWI support to the board? We acknowledge that the Act does not assign the function of administering the affairs of the board to DPI. In practice, though, support to the board and management and operations of the villages falls under Program 5, so that's the prestige policy of the DPWI. The department has reported recurring shortcomings in respect of TEFLA, that's the facilities contract manager, in respect of turnaround times, and ongoing discussions are taking place between the department and TEFLA. TEFLA was given until 13 March 2026 to prepare and provide it with a turnaround improvement plan. As recent as December 2025, DPWI appointed a Deputy Director General of Facilities Management, and the administration of the board and the operations of the villages will now reside under facilities management as one measure to address operational challenges within the prestige program. So one can think of these as being reforms that DPWI is currently intending to put in place. However, as we stand, there's no dedicated full-time administrator that has been appointed to manage the day-to-day operations at the villages, causing governance challenges. So you would have staff that have their ordinary program responsibilities, and then as an add-on, you then have responsibilities in respect to the day-to-day administration and management of the villages. DPWI also introduced the committee to a turnaround plan that it has initiated with the objective of improving infrastructure at the villages. Parliament committees have, over the past number of years, in a number of engagements, looked at both the functioning of the board and operations at the villages. So, for example, the Select Committee on Transport, Public Service and Administration, in the consideration of the 2022-23 annual report of the DPWI, raised concern about the board continuing to be non-functional. And they echoed the finding of the Auditor General that said that the board not finalizing its annual financial statement means that it is not being held accountable for 11 million rand annually, and that it resulted in neglected facilities, lack of action and resolution of long-standing problems, safety concerns, and a lack of accountability in contracts. Similarly, the Portfolio Committee on Public Works have had numerous engagements with DPWI. As far back as March 2020, the department undertook to the Portfolio Committee on Public Works that those refurbishments of those houses where the asbestos is, that would be registered for inclusion in the department's 2020-21 financial year. We now sit in 2026. Between 2020 and 2023, issues that now is familiar to us, non-functional alarms and intercom systems, blockages of the sewage line in Block E in Acacia Park, the villages not falling within REMIS, unlawful occupancy in villages, those have all been risks identified by the Portfolio Committee as early as 2022, and those risks remain. So having considered DPWI support to the board, what the committee has found in its review and its oversight visits, the committee at its meeting of 2020 March considered two things. The first one is, would the interest and the mandate of Parliament be better served if Parliament becomes the custodian of the assets within the parliamentary villages? And to inform that decision, the committee requested the Office of the Secretary to Parliament to brief the ad hoc committee on its capacity to provide executive management support to the board should should the board take on that expanded governance functions that were stipulated in the earlier slides. And the Secretary to Parliament satisfied the committee that where policy decision is taken for the administration of Parliament to chair the board, for Parliament to provide executive administrative support to the board, and for Parliament to become the custodian of the assets as contemplated in Kiama, the administration would develop the required facilities management strategy to give effect to those policy decisions. Office of the SDP also indicated areas in terms of which it might have to outsource some of those facilities management aspects. I early introduced the interpretation challenge with Kiama. So at the same meeting, the Constitutional Legal Service Office also briefed the ad hoc committee on the roles of a custodian versus the role of a user, and which one would better allow Parliament to meet its operational needs. Having deliberated on the presentations, the ad hoc committee resolved as follows. The one, that the Act must be amended to assign executive and administrative responsibilities in respect of the functioning of the board to Parliament. Number two, that the Act must be amended to include a section similar to Section 9 of the Forest Services Act, in terms of which executive authority of Parliament is the custodian of the villages for the purposes of Kiama. And then third, that Section 4 of Kiama, so a consequential amendment, that Section 4 of Kiama must be amended to make references to the Act and Parliament as an exception to DPWI being the custodian of all assets vested in the national government. Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. That concludes the review. In session 2, we will then look at how does the review feed into the options and the proposals for legislative and policy development. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I think that was quite helpful. And I'm sure members have followed all the activities that have been undertaken by the committee to come to this conclusion. Are you done with everything? Because I thought.
No, Chair, that was just the findings of the review. The next session is when we go to the recommendations for policy and legislative.
Yes, I wanted to proceed so that we can discuss the whole thing, considering that other members would leave at some point,
Okay.
because everyone is making notes.
Okay, I'll do so, Chair. Members, for the next session, it will be more convenient for me to read from the actual policy document. What did I do now? It's very small. Okay. So, Chair, I thought the best way to approach section 7, the next section, would be to pose questions. So, having considered the review, the first question the committee needs to ask itself is, what should be the objects of the bill? Okay. So the policy review findings tells us the following things. It tells us the object of the Act are not clear. It does not link the Act to the mandate and operational needs of Parliament. So what could or should an Act intended to provide accommodation to Parliament and its structures look like? The proposal is as follows, Chair. It's proposed that the objects of the Act, or for now we'll talk about the bill, the committee bill. The proposal is that the objects of the Act should be to provide for the continued existence and the management, control, and maintenance of parliamentary villages as places of accommodation for Parliament and its associated structures. The second object is to recognize parliamentary villages as strategic facilities that inform an integral part of the institutional infrastructure required for the effective functioning, security, and continuity of Parliament. The third object is to provide for the establishment, composition, powers, and functions of the Parliamentary Villages Management Board and Residence Committee to ensure that the planning, allocation, and management of accommodation are aligned with Parliament's institutional mandate, oversight responsibilities, and operational requirements. And lastly, to provide for matters connected thereto. So, Chair, my suggestion is for each questions, might we allow for deliberations on the recommendations? Because they feed into each other. So if members, for example, agree on that objects, the next question of would the mandate of Parliament and the objects of the bill be best furthered, that depends on how the committee responds to the objects that have just been presented. Okay.
I think if members feel like commenting, because these are recommendations,
Yeah.
they will just raise their hands if we still stand by. These are the decisions we made as recommendations, because we've broadened. Other members can also come in to just indicate from us as we go section by section.
Yes. Thank you, Chair.
I think that will assist the meeting a great deal. Are there any comments on the first one? Yes, Honorable Dagmo.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks also for the presentation. Seems very clear that the ad hoc committee has done a huge amount of work. As much as the Joint Standing Committee has not discussed the issue at all, I think one of the critical issues, and I'm not sure whether the ad hoc committee has dealt with this at all, would be that if the recommendations, and if you could just go back to the previous slide before the issue of the bill, there are very clear recommendations there. No, not, you know, those, there were 4 basic proposals. Is that, you know, in terms of the amendments to GIAMA, the amendment to the actual act, et cetera, one of the issues which would emerge is how the financing, the issue of budgets. I'm not sure whether the ad hoc committee had any chance to meet with the Public Works Portfolio Committee, and in your engagements, whether the issue of funding emerged. You know, we know that from this report that's been given, there's a huge amount of work to be done, upgrading of the parks, et cetera, and it would appear that up to now, you know, the budget for that has been located in Public Works. So is there an in-principle proposal that budget would just follow function? So I just wanted to ask that question. And then secondly, the actual physical properties that we're talking about here, these 3 properties, I've never really been clear as to where the ownership of that, of those properties lies. Is there like a lease agreement with another sphere of government, or are these at this point in time all owned by Public Works, or are there any leases with other spheres of government? For instance, that point that you raised around the emerging problem of informal settlements. And it is a huge issue. I know a colleague who was attacked by a dog, you know, in that area. So clearly we have to deal with it. But in the recommendation, it says that the city needs to, you know, move with an eviction, for instance. Whereas at a particular previous meeting, I'd heard either the minister or someone, or a city official or one of the members saying, no, the property actually belongs to Public Works. So any notion of an eviction is not an issue for the city. It's a Public Works matter. So the actual ownership of these 3 properties that are being talked about, just that clarity. And as I'm saying, we haven't had a discussion on the matter, but it would appear that there are very clear recommendations coming out. And then you, Chairperson, you were just asking the officials to then go on to the actual proposals for the bill. And but I think essentially the orientation of having Parliament being responsible and having democratic and accountable structures in running the parks, etc., is a solid one. But and my very last question, at the moment, all those amounts that are reflected there, what members are paying, etc., it gets deducted from a member's salary. Where does that money actually go? Does this board, in its current form, have an account? There was some reference earlier that apparently the accounts of this board have not been audited for X number of years. So I'm just interested to know whether the board has a bank account. I would imagine that the other piece of legislation that one would need to look at is the Financial Management of Parliament Act. I'm not sure whether there was any proposals of amendments which might need to be made there to include the fact that if it's going to go this way, that there needs to be possibly that the Financial Management of Parliament legislation would need to guide how reporting is done on the affairs of the board. But that's just an initial comment. Thank you, Chair.
I hope our team have captured that, Honorable Clerk and Honorable Van Zyl. Yes, Van Zyl.
Chairperson, I think there's also a great need to look at the term of the board, because I think to have an election every year is a problem, because you just settle in as the new structure, and then you got to have another election. And I think we should look at doing it in terms of the political term. During the 5-year term, elect a board, and they should then serve for the political term. I think it gives the board a lot more stability in order to address issues. Then also, I just wanted to check and get clarity, because in terms of Section 44 of the Financial Management of Parliament Act, it explicitly bans any participation of MPs in structures that approve procurement decisions. So I think that's something we must really look at. And I think we must set some really strict criterias. The board has not been in place and the financials have not been audited. I think you said between 2010 and 2011 last. And I think that is a major problem. And I think if the board had some stability in a period of time, we would be able to breach those problems and deal with those problems in a specific manner, Chair. So I've got lots more, but as we go, I'll speak to
Yes,
it.
our
Thank
technical
you.
team will respond,
you.
but I know, as a matter of fact, some of the issues are covered, like the issue you are raising on the term. We did make a recommendation, and I'm having scanned through the document when it was sent to us. I know it's covered, so I think it's a valid point. Honorable Van Zyl.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the presentations by Ms. Clark. I'm just a bit confused on one section, and it's on page 17 of the discussion document. It's 2.2.2.2, whereby the Constitution specifically describes Parliament as an organ of state. But there was some confusion when you said that it cannot be an organ of state with GIAMA. So I don't know if you can clarify just that. Sort of, the Constitution says one thing, but GIAMA says another, and we know the Constitution is the supreme law. So we can just clarify that, because the Parliament is an organ of state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mvana.
Thank you, Chair. I am not sure, because I was not part and parcel of other meetings. If I happen to raise things that you have already amended on them, and also they are also included in the submission, I really apologize in the meeting. But I'm a little bit surprised about the gaps in terms of this act. You know, there's a lot that needs to be amended, really. One of them is that I agree with the honorable member in terms of saying that the term of the board needs to be aligned with the term of office of honorable members. It's really wasting time of having these meetings to elect board. 1 year, because 1 year is just a little time for the board members, even to get and capture on what is it exactly that is happening in villages. Rollover financially. I think Honorable Dagmore has a little bit covered me in some. But it's so strange that the money is being rolled over in terms of the board. I am asking myself, can't we, in these rollovers that happened yearly by yearly, because it will mean that it's a lot of money. You know, members, when they were joining this as members of they were saying there's a lot of money that has been saved in for the board members. And they thought that they will get some sort of remuneration. And they were so surprised when they don't get anything, whilst they are supposed to volunteer in terms of giving the lentuka, the work for the villages. But what is strange enough, there are things that we need in villages that might have also be covered by these rollover monies. What is this money doing and what is it going to do ultimately at the end of the day? I know for a fact that members were also crying for a financial report throughout in all meetings. Financial report, and we have to get the financial report that is audited, which hasn't been done yet, unless otherwise I miss some meetings. One, this gymnasium thing, all members are also crying on them. Of course, I know in Pelican, they are asking for fans with heaters now, because they wanted fans. It was too hot in these houses. Whilst it's break, you know, it's not asbestos. I am thinking of those that are staying in asbestos in Acacia. Now they are saying, okay, these fans must have heaters because it's also winter time now. Where is that money that needs or that has been rolled over?
Colleagues, can I perhaps urge, because I can see we'll never finish. These recommendations are many of the things we are saying. Do you mind making notes next to, because we've got the documents?
Yeah.
Let's make notes rather, because we're gonna discuss.
I'm going to finish right now.
Okay.
The act, it's worse when it's saying that we cannot say residing member is being stipulated and being, there's a gap, man. You can't say that you are a resider and you are not included in the act. Something needs to happen in that clause. Okay, let me also finish up because I see that you are trying to push the meeting for us to be released earlier. You know, this thing of assets belonging to public works, I agree. But at times it confuses when you say treasurer must also have a say. We understand financially. We definitely have to via a treasurer. The treasury department is sometimes wasting a lot of money in terms of transport department. You know, Chairperson, it's very worrying when you see a bus, a 65 bus seater, having or transporting one person from the village to another, back and forth. You know, you ask yourself, what is it The planning is so poor to such an extent that both these departments are not being able to share themselves on what is it that is on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side. They don't. Let me stop there just to avoid other honorable members to have a bite on this, but there's a lot that needs also to be corrected during our era. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, colleagues. I think as we move forward, let's focus on the proposals that are before us. There are 4. It's either you add on them or you subtract on them. Leave other things, because I can assure you many of the things that you are saying, probably with an exception of the financial aspect that you raised, but even that, if our team talks, you'll see that is covered somehow. Let's rather add specifically, let's go according to the items. And then at the end, if there's something we've missed that you would have wanted to raise, we will also still allow you to raise it so that we are not all over. Otherwise, we're going to struggle with the discussion. Honorable Gobe. Okay, there's just something Honorable Clerk wants to clarify, maybe.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chairperson, I mean, I have a huge document that I've prepared for this meeting. I think if I can just possibly email it through to you,
Please send.
it would be a lot easier. Otherwise, I'm going to be here all day.
Okay,
And
please
then-
email it. It will help us.
I'm just wondering if there was any consideration given to the notion of housing allowances as tabled by. the
Chair.
Council and
Chair,
Just one second.
Chair,
Chief with Forum. If you could also give us.
Honorable Clerk,
Thank you.
Yeah,
can you speak through the mic so that all of us can be able to hear, Chair?
yeah.
Because she's making a submission and we're not able to hear.
Okay, she's saying was the consideration about housing allowances. If it will fit here, then the technical team will advise us. Honorable Kobe?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I just want to make a submission because I see here on slide 16, it says that the Act does not make provision for the duration of office. And now already it says that the board's term of office has lapsed. Now, I'm just thinking about as a matter for continuation. I'd like to make a submission that I don't know whose regulation then determined that the board's time has lapsed and come to an end now. But it then needs to be extended because this ad hoc committee is doing work in the meantime. So we want that stability to still remain. Meanwhile, this ad hoc committee is doing the work. So the two need to run concurrently. I don't know who's responsible for that, for the regulations under the duration of office, because that's not within the Act. So how can we then, as an ad hoc committee, make a recommendation that the current board's term, which ended in March, then be extended and run in concurrent with the ad hoc committee or the work that we're doing, so that by the time we end legislation, the board is still intact, and we can then start making regulations as to how then we start changing with regards to the term of office, or do we continue with the current sitting board? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable Tlangweni, and then Honorable Ramlobeng will be the last.
Thank you, Chair. I do fully agree with what the Honorable Kobe have said pertaining to the board. Bear in mind that we literally had to struggle even many a times for the minister to just, or the public works to just sign off in terms of the board, and because we were ready the day after being elected as residents committee, but it took a little while to actively get the work done because of the dragging in feet in terms of public works. So that also needs to be factored into the extension. I just want to check, Chair. I think it's on 3, the categories of lawfully resides in villages. We made provision, and there's an 8 description up till 27. Now, I know I have older members of parliament within specifically, maybe let me make an example of the EFF. Mam Kaula is 70. She lives with a daughter that is 40. So which means they won't be affected in if we are putting an age description for 2027. A child is a child, whether the child turns 50 years old, that remains your child. It doesn't on your child when they are reaching a certain age. And then I want to also check pertaining to, maybe perhaps we must also factor in, Chair, that have not been factored in, parents as well, because in Parliament we do allow to get our parents on flights. Why can't our parents also be factored into this bill to say, if my parent were to come and stay with me, I have an 80-year-old father, if my dad, I don't feel that I want to book him into a old age facility. So if he wants to come and stay with me, it should be sort of allowed. So I think that we must also make a recommendation in pertaining to parents. And I think another thing that have also come up as well, even to members of parliament, because these days we are a generation that also have to take care of your siblings, your sisters, your brothers. If you happen, your parents have passed on from an early age, where are that also factored in, so that we don't only block it only for your child, but I think it must have a broader analysis as to how we define family and a family unit. Thank you, Chair.
Very much. Think valuable input. Honorable Ramleben.
Thank you so much, Chair, and good morning or good day to everyone who's here. Chair, I might have joined the proceedings a bit later, but I think I arrived earlier, was still in a meeting, because I'm supposed to be in a portfolio committee meeting as a chair. So I had to compromise and allow Honorable Engelbrecht to chair on my behalf so that I can also partake in this session today. Chair, I think Honorable Ntlangwini would have covered me on the inclusion of our parents and equally speaking to the age factor on our kids, because I'm a mom to very old kids. And whether they're going to be 30 or those are my kids, and to me, they remain kids in that aspect. So perhaps we must find a way of crafting that, but mainly talk to if I, Khomozo, allocated a particular unit or that house, what happens within and who I bring must be confined to me, but the Act must allow for that. We are signing forms that DPWI makes us to sign that declares who we're staying with currently in our units, that ultimately speaks to who are those who come sessionally or occasionally to visit us. So the Act must equally talk to that so that we are not found wanting. So I was aligning my thoughts of inclusion to Honorable Ntlangwini on that basis. And then I agree as well with Honorable Kobe, Chair, because I also wanted to reiterate on this matter that I think yesterday or day before we received a message that says the term of the board has come to a lapse and so forth and so on, without even being taken through it or even in that factor, board meeting being called to explain that process. And we must reiterate and say it openly here that since the inception of the board, I think we only had 2 board meetings, Chair, for the whole year, which the outstanding matters that the board would have raised were still yet to receive responses to those matters that the board would have raised. And among those is the financial statements that date to 2020, which are still yet to be audited. It's good that the appointment of the panel for auditors has been done in January. We'll perhaps see the fruit of those statements when they do come. So I agree that let the term of the board to continue, ultimately running concurrently with the work of the ad hoc, with the amendments to it, and equally buy into what Honorable Mvana would have said, that equally the Act must indicate that the term of the boards must align to the term of members. If our appointment is 2024 to 2029, the Act must talk to that, that the board must be aligned to that. For instance, I chair the Pension Fund Board, the Political Office Bearers Board that deals with members' pension. The term of that board is aligned to the term of members. So it's not occasionally yearly. So it's a 5-year term. So I'll be a chair of that board. Perhaps I'll recuse when my political party decides to withdraw me, then someone else must come. But if I stay ultimately up until 2029, I remain in that board until such time, Chair. And in the board, the Act equally must be able to talk to, because of it only limits the board, the work of the board gets to be limited in the current form to transport and so forth. And bearing in mind the issues that they would have raised on members of parliament coming into procurement matters. So it must be find a way of how it gets to be dealt with, but the function of the board must not be limited to transport only, must talk to issues of members of parliament residing in the boards and also in parliament, so that it holistically speaks to everything. Because right now, there are issues pertaining to members that are complaining about, with instance of residencies. You are not able to even expedite those matters because of you then get to, every time when you are in a board meeting, get to be cautioned that your function and mandate is limited to here, whereas then you can't even go outside the scope. Lastly, it would be on the security aspects of SAPS. The Act must be clear and precise on the safety and security of, or the submission of members in villages. What is currently happening in villages in terms of SAPS, it's not correct. And I agree that some of the incidences that are happening in parks are not recorded as should. For instance, in Acacia, there's still people who are coming into villages without having tags, and SAPS allowing them. And in this instance, it's because if I'm known, I'm Khomoto, I once stayed in the village, I just enter the gate there and I greet whoever constable or sergeant is there because of my known, and the gate gets to be opened. So we must not limit it only to Uber or e-hailers. It's done generally because of you would be knowing officials or you will be knowing the SAPS. So the Act must be explicit on how it should define security that ought to be given to members, so that SAPS can be able to assist us in that regard. Thanks, Chair. Those are my submissions.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, please bear with me. I think for the purposes of time, I will now make you make notes because we are commenting on the entire document. So I will really please bear with me. Can you please proceed? We'll make notes. Let's go to number 2. Yes, Honorable Van Rey.
Van Zyl,
Van Zyl,
thank you,
Van Zyl.
Chairperson. I just wanted to have some clarity on the exclusion of Parliament as an organ of state before we move on to number 2, because I might have a counter argument. Thank you.
Yes, if you can please clarify the few issues that have been raised by members.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. With permission, I'll hand over to Legal Services to deal with the Parliament as an exception in PVMBA.
Yes, Honorable Van Zyl. My name is Talana Halley-Starkey, and I'm with my colleague Daksha Kassan, and we're from Legal Services. So the issue with whether Guiama is applicable and the sort of confusion, it lies in the definition of organ of state of Guiama. If you look at the definition of organ of state, it says, means any department of state or administration contemplating paragraph A of 239. So we as Parliament, we fall under B of 239, and we feel that that excludes us, although it's applicable. That and the fact that if you look further, it deals with the accounting officer of a user, but it excludes us from an accounting officer because it refers to the PFMA, and as you know, we don't use the PFMA. So that's where the confusion lies. I hope that's clear. Thank you.
Sorted. Thank you very much. Please proceed.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. So as I go through the next questions, I'll just draw members' attention to where I'm responding to questions and comments members have made. Okay. So once we've dealt with what the objects of the bill should be, the next question is, Would the mandate of Parliament and the objects of the bill be best furthered by the Minister and DPI or by Parliament? So that question has already been answered, Chair, in that meeting of 20 March 2026. So what needs to happen in the Act to give effect to the recommendations of the Select Committee, of the Ad hoc Committee, Chair? The first one is the Act will need to insert the definition of executive authority to Parliament, to mean the Speaker of the NA and the Chairperson of the NCOP acting jointly. And once we've included that definition, what we then do is, in the Act, include a section similar to Section 9 of the Foreign Services Act, in terms of which the executive authority of Parliament is the custodian for the purpose of Kiama. It's also necessary to effect a consequential amendment to Kiama to make reference to the Parliamentary Villages Board Act in its new form and Parliament as an exception to DPWI being the custodian. We would also then have to amend the Act to assign the executive of authority the following powers and functions that is currently assigned to the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure. The powers of functions in Section 2.1 in the respect of the appointment of board members. The powers and function in Section 2 sub 7 in the respect of the compensation of members of the board. Section 3.1b in respect of setting of fees for transport services. Section 3.2c in respect of the decisions on the performance of the duties of the board. And Section 4.4 in respect of the utilization of surplus funds of the board. I might add here, Honorable Clerk, we will have to go back to look at how the finance, yeah, we will have to go back to see what the FMPA says and how that affects what decisions the board will have to take, or possibly where the board would have to delegate it to a body that is composed exclusively of officials. So that we will have to come back and see what the formulation of that would be. Okay, so if all of those functions are assigned to the executive authority of Parliament, what would be the remaining functions of the Minister in the Act? The first one is the power to designate any other asset of national government as a parliamentary village that would remain with the Minister. And once any other immovable asset then becomes a parliamentary village, then the role of the executive authority of Parliament would then kick in respect of such areas. So again, the question is, what is the remaining functions of the Minister then? The Act could incorporate a cross-reference to Section 19 of Kiama. So Section 19 of Kiama says, what is the functions of a Minister, even where an immovable asset is under custodianship of, for example, Parliament. Yeah. The next way to give effect to that committee resolution of 20 March is to insert a provision that assign executive management and administrative responsibilities in respect of the functioning of the board to Parliament. We would also need to insert the provision that assigns responsibility for the administration and day-to-day operations of the villages to Parliament. So now in our mind, we should have a picture of Parliament now being the custodian and having all those powers and functions assigned to it. So now the next question is, what categories of persons should be allowed to lawfully reside in the villages? The recommendation is fix the gap in the Act by inserting a definition for resident. And the definitions should list the resident and their household. Because we know currently it's not just MPs, it's not just sectional officials, it's the households that are living in the villages along with them. So we can then talk about the primary resident being the member of Parliament, inclusive of the member of the NA and the NCOP permanent delegate, the designated support staff, sessional workers declared by the DPWI, and any other category of person as prescribed by the executive authority to Parliament. So what would the definition of designated support staff be? Here we are talking about political support staff. defined as being employees of political parties represented in Parliament, ordinarily resident outside of Cape Town, and designated as such by the Chief Whips and assigned to Parliament to undertake parliamentary work. So the definition of designated support staff, we are borrowing from that Memorandum of Agreement between Parliament and the SDP. It would also be the parliamentary office bearers. And it follows the same formulation, employees of Parliament ordinarily resident outside of Cape Town, and also aides to members with disabilities. So aides with members with disabilities, there's not a requirement that such persons should be ordinarily resident outside of Cape Town, because here, aligned with the object of the Act, it's to provide support to the member with disability. So where that aid normally stays, I would almost say it's neither here or there. It's about whether when the member wakes up in the morning, is that aid and assistance available to the member. We would then also insert a definition for sessional officials to mean a sessional official declared as such by the DG for the purposes of the Department of Public Service and Administration policy. Okay, so here's where we would need to make some changes. We would then need to insert a definition for household. So who's in the household with a primary resident? We're saying their spouse, the permanent life partner, or dependent child, or dependent relative. So the dependent relative would then fall within, it's older than the age of 27, but the way it is formulated here, there's a relationship of dependence between the person staying and between the primary resident and the person staying. So I would need guidance from the committee here. Do we want to retain that relationship of dependence? So are we talking about, I'm the primary resident, I'm a member, but my adult daughter who's got the work and got the salary and she's not dependent on me. If we are talking about including that persons in the household also, we would then have to formulate a slightly different definition for dependence as part of the household. Okay, so that's a first question mark we would have to come back. The nature of dependence between the primary resident and the person who's staying with him. Also then include a domestic worker employed in a full-time capacity by one or more of the residents. Because we know some of the domestic workers that work for more than one person, but to allow them to lawfully reside within the villages, one way to do that is to include domestic workers as part of the household. So this is what member was talking about. We would then include a definition for a dependent child under the age of 18, unmarried, does not have a regular income, or someone who's over the age of 18 but under the age of 27, unmarried and studying, or over the age of 18 but owing to a mental or physical disability, does not receive a regular income, grant, or allowance. So all of those definitions speaks to a relationship of dependence. And here we've borrowed from the member support handbook on those definitions. We'll also insert a definition of spouse as contemplated in the Marriages Act, a Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, and the Civil Union Act. Also a definition of permanent life partner. So that is not in terms of legislation, but that is in terms of case law and precedent that we get to the definition of what a life partner is. Yeah. So then here, like I said, we would need guidance of whether do we want to retain the relationship of dependence. Okay. Then the next question is, how can the composition of the board be amended to ensure that the board is effective in its functions? Okay, so the following composition is proposed. The Secretary to Parliament as the chairperson, the Director General of the DPWI remains on the board but is no longer the chairperson. A nominated representative from Parliament's administration dealing with villages. a nominated representative from Parliament's administration responsible for protection services, the House chairperson responsible for the villages, a member of the South African Police Service, and the chairpersons of the Residence Committee. So what we do not have here is in the current formula, those 3 residents that have been appointed by the Residence Committee, we instead have the chairperson of the Residence Committee. So in doing that, we would then reduce the size of the board from 13 to 9, and make it more effective with persons who are in a position to have a broader view of the needs of all the villages serving on the board. In respect of the board and drawing on best practice, the recommendation is to include provisions that specify qualifications, eligibility and exclusions, duration of office, resignation and removal of board members, and those items listed as I spoken about when I did the presentation. It's also recommended that a board term of office that coincides with the term of Parliament being 5 years would be more practical than the current 1-year term. On the question of whether the term of the board can be extended, ordinarily you cannot extend something that has died in law already. It presents a challenge. One can make a recommendation for the minister to expeditiously appoint a new board. And that originates from a reading of the Act. And even when the department mentioned it to at first, we said, but we can't see where the term of the board is prescribed in the Act. And it is the department's interpretation of Section 2B. So when it talks about the members of the board, it says 3 residents, of whom 2 shall be parliamentarians and 1 shall be a sessional official from each place of accommodation contemplated in the definition of parliamentary villages, elected annually by the Residence Committee of the place in question. So Parliament's interpretation is the term of the board cannot be longer than the term of people who are elected to serve on it. So if I'm represented by my Residence Committee and my Residence Committee must vote for me annually, then that means at the end of every year, the election must take place again. Right? And so that is the department's interpretation and why they come to the view that, that the term of the board would be 1 year. And so just to clarify any interpretational difficulties, the recommendation is in the Act specify the term of the board coincides with the term of Parliament. Okay. Yes, the term of the board must coincide with the term of Parliament. So it must run together. Yeah.
So meaning like for 5 years.
Yeah.
Yes, Member Tlangwin. Please press your mic.
Thanks, Chair. There's a clarifying question or point that I want to make. I think it's on, I don't know, should we come in now, Chair, or should we wait?
You can.
I can come in.
I think we're doing very well now to cover because I was worried. Okay, you can come in. Member Clark, Member Van Zyl, Member Ramlubeng, and Member.
There's a one that the composition of the board. What was the logic of cutting it? Number one, and removing the 3 members that are coming from the Residence Committee. I would like it to maintain that that 3 in that committee of the board. Believe you me, most of the members that you will find will be the 3 and subs to set these meetings. And then what was the logic of having the Secretary to Parliament being the chairperson of the board? Thank you. Shouldn't we rather let the board members decide who will be the chairperson or elected in that meeting? What is the logic of putting the secretary to parliament? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable Clerk.
Thank you, Chairperson. I have 3 questions that I'd like to ask. The House Chairperson is a singular recommendation, but the NCOP and the NA have House Chairperson responsibility for the villages. Is this correct, or is it just an error? And then how would the scope of the board impact the JSC FMP, given it is the oversight committee of the executive authority for Parliament, which would not and could be the custodians? And then the inclusion of a category of staff eligible for a unit allocation at the discretion of the executive authority presents a risk. At best, this provision could accommodate legitimate categories such as contractors. At worst, however, it creates scope for the direction of abuse, potentially allowing accommodation to be allocated to individuals without legitimate basis. This could be amended to be more specific. And then I also wanted clarity. In the beginning of the meeting, you also mentioned a tenant will not be allowed to accommodate a lodger. Just give me clarification on that, because I'm not too sure, if you have a family member like your daughter coming to visit you for a week, would that not be allowed anymore? Because normally, you had to just send an email with all the details of that person for that week. So if I could just get clarification on that as well.
Thank you, Honorable Fansey.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just looking at the board composition, is it possible just to maybe understand who would have full voting rights within that board? Would the non-MPs also have that? Thank you.
Honorable Ramloben.
Thank you, Chair. I think the last speaker would have covered me on what I wanted to ask as well. The official status in terms of voting in the board, it needs to be clarified so that you don't have officials wanting to take decisions on matters that members want to raise in regards to administration. But 2 chairs that Honorable Ntlangwini also covered me, that I would want clarity as well. What was the rationale of removing the 3 reps? Because of boards must have representations. Yes, it's okay to have an automatic chairs of residencies automatically forming part, but we still need to maintain the 3 reps. So the status quo of the current setup of the board in terms of the reps, I would want to maintain as it is. You clarify us, and then let's include it to maintain as it is, so that outside the chair, there are other people as well who are assisting, and equally get clarity. What was the rationale of having the STP as the chair of the board? You see, currently you have a problem of the board not being functional because of non-availability of the Director General. So because of, and also which says the Director General is the chair of the board. So because of non-functionality of it, the Director General is not available in most cases. The board will be set up to say on this particular day it needs to sit, then you find the DG is not available, then the board gets to be cancelled. You are putting another busy person, similar roles as that one, to chair. Are we not setting ourselves again for another failure of a board functioning? So leave that prerogative of deciding who is the chair of the board to the members who will be representing their own villages in that setup of the board to decide who is the chair. If they decide that the chair is one of their members, let it be, but the STP must come in as an official to assist on accounting on matters that relates or pertains to members, but must not be the one who adjudicates process and equally reports to himself in that process, must come in that board as an official. And lastly, Chair, on the domestic workers. I think I agree with an assertion that domestic workers, if I have a domestic worker that comes to me full-time the whole week, then I must accommodate that domestic work, must be part of my package. But if not, they can be a part of the residencies, because amongst other problems is that you have a lot of domestic workers that you can't even locate. Where do they stay and where do they come from? Because of they will be rotational. They come to this house one day, another one, but there are many in villages, which in some instances cause problems with in and out or movement
you.
in that regard.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mvana, and then Honorable Gobe will be the last.
Thanks, Chair. I'm a little bit covered by the latter speakers, and the only thing that Honorable Khomotso is reminding me is about this one of domestic workers. I want to talk once and just keep quiet after. I'm sorry if I am rushing for something that is still gonna be discussed. You know, I see that Pelican Oversight came to a situation of domestic workers that are not registered. Now, what I want to suggest, and the situation is not the one that is acceptable in those cottages. Can we, I don't know how are we going to do this? Can we evict those workers that are there? And as we before did that, but unsuccessfully, we were unsuccessful in that attempt. So that by the time when the public works is about to renovate and revamp that cottage, there's no one that is staying there. Because even that one of eviction needs lawyers and it's taking time a little bit. Then let's rather do that and make a plan, and maybe the chairperson should also convince other members. You know, if the other 3 members were part and parcel of this thing of board, they won't ask any questions from us, because if they are not there, they ask so many questions and they think that they are not represented. So I want just to add, all those honorable members were saying that they must be part and parcel of members of the board, so as to make our work easier. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Gobe.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I'm raising my concern is one that was raised, I think, by the Honorable Ramulubeng as well. Chair, the current composition of the board, our main concern was that the accounting officer for public works and infrastructure also serves as the chairperson of the board, the automatic chairperson. He cannot do an allocation and then adjudicate over that allocation as well. It is not done. It must, in terms of good governance, there must be a separation of powers. So when we take the Secretary to Parliament as well, who's the accounting officer of Parliament, and he then also sits as the chairperson of a budget that he must oversee, we run the risk of having a player and a referee in this instance, being the one who spends the budget and must still oversee it. So I do second the suggestion that if he is to be on the board, he then should become an ex officio member with no voting rights, because he cannot allocate and then start deciding over the allocation. I think we are then setting a very bad precedent. The lines are too blurred. Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd also venture to suggest that there must not be an automatic chairperson. That must then be decided by the members of the board, the current sitting board. It cannot be decided too. Then what that does is that it continues to limit the scope and functioning of the board, because we are deciding for them who must take final decisions for them. Thank you.
Member Clark.
I just want to say we agree 100% with what has just been said.
Thank you very much. I think there is general consensus on the chair and representation, and just make sure that there is no duplication, because the the nominated reps of protection services and subs. So you might need to clarify which is what, because it could be the same thing. And in the main, I think we are talking about subs here because it's right at the village. So, and then the question of the chair, I think there is a general consensus that let the committee nominate the chair. And then the issue of that we need to cover here on the board. Remember, there are two issues. There is the board, which is what is being recommended here. And then we also said that the village committees had no local stand in the current act. So that has to be catered for so that it's clarified. So let's separate those two things. And then the issue of the term, I think there's general agreement that the term must be linked to the term of office. And then if are there any legal advice in the comments that have been made so that we make sure that you may, please.
Not currently, Chairperson. We have been taking notes. We've been, sitting down and reflecting.
Speak closer to the mic so that members can hear.
Sorry, Chairperson, not currently. We are taking notes and we will research and provide input to Ms. Clark.
Thank you very much, Honorable Clerk.
Sorry, Chair, is that for all three questions that are posed? That you will come back to me on?
Questions will be provided. I'm saying we are talking about decisions now. There's certain things that the committee is saying explicitly. So
This is explicit.
yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to respond to some of the questions, perhaps before we proceed to the remaining items?
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. The committee's direction is clear on the consensus matters. Just the one that legal services won't get back to on the clock. So a lodger is someone who rents from you while you are living there versus subletting, which is someone rents from you without you being there.
No, that was clarified. It doesn't need, we are fine with that.
I asked the question, House Chairperson in a singular recommendation, but NCOP and NA have House Chairpersons that are responsible for the villages. Is this an error or is this correct?
It's supposed to be plural, Chair. It's supposed to be plural, so the House Chairperson for both the NA and NCOP.
Okay, so I think that having been clarified, can we proceed?
Ivanga, Chair, and Vanga.
So it caters for both the NA and NCOP. So it's just a question of fixing plural from one to more than one. Thank you. Member Van Zyl, and then we can proceed.
Sorry, Chairperson, just on that will push the composition to 10, which is an even number. So the Chairperson then would still have the casting vote. I just wanted to have that on record. Thank you.
It would now be the inclusion of the reps from the villages would be back again. So it'd be 19 and 12, 13.
Thank you. You can proceed.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, Honorable Member.
So on the question of the board not having to comply with the PVMBA unless specified, so the recommendation is to allow the bill, to align the bill to the PVMBA, to require the board to report to Parliament on strategic plans, annual performance plans, annual reports and annual financial statements as audited by the AGSA. And also to require the board to comply with funding and procurement responsibilities set out in the PVMBA, as well as the Financial Management of Parliament Act. So that is an addition now, Chair, drawing on the inputs from the committee.
So there was a point raised on that section 40
Yes.
or 44.
Yes.
Have you looked into that?
No, so that is part of the homework between legal services and us. Us as committee support, we will revert back to the committee on.
Yeah, let's just make sure that is properly clarified and it covers that particular section that was quoted here. Okay. Thank you. You can proceed.
So the next question is, what should the composition and function of the residence committees be? So Currently, the Act does not establish the Residence Committee nor its composition. So insert a provision to establish Residence Committee. This is a proposal for how the Residence Committee can be composed of. 3 MPs residing in the villages, 2 designated support staff residing in the villages. Again, because the villages rule says the needs of MPs take priority. 1 representative from the facilities management company, where 1 is appointed. 1 rep from DPWI, 1 representative from Parliament, and 1 representative from SAPS. Like with the board, include specifications for the residence committee, so ranging from qualifications to appointment and removal of chairpersons. And then for both the board and for the residence committee, as the members' inputs have given, we will also include provisions on the voting rights of the different members of both the board and the residence committee in terms of decision making. Again, the term of the residence committee to coincide with the term of parliament being 5 years. Insert provisions to assign residence committee with advocacy, resident engagement, operational input, communication and welfare and support functions, but also in the Act, assign the function of inquiring into and resolving complaints of non-compliance to the village's rules to the residence committee in the Act. But then also insert the safeguard to say that where the residence committee is not functioning operational, the board will take on that responsibility of inquiring into and resolving complaints. And where the board is not properly functioning, that can be directed to the executive authority. Yeah.
Yeah, just before you move, so if you note the meeting of the 20th of March at Pelican, we sought to de-link the work of the committee from Public Works. And then there is a question that was raised by Honorable Doug Moore about the funding following. So in these compositions, there is a deliberate attempt, which perhaps we can clarify as, of still linking Public Works through either facilities management, a rep from DPW, and even on the other side, if you can just clarify that so that it's clear, because we talked about the separation of power between the executive and Parliament.
Okay. Thank you, Honorable Chair. So the facilities contract the facilities management company reflected here would be the one appointed by whomever is responsible for the day-to-day administration. Chair will recall when the Office of the Secretary to Parliament briefed the committee, even then they said it might be necessary to outsource certain functions in relation to the operation. So that's not the one specifically appointed by DPWI. DPWI will remain an asset of the national government. Parliament will be the custodian of that asset. And for that reason, we thought a representative from DPWI would be appropriate on the residence committee. But I also see the point, Chair, with representation on the board, it might not be necessary for DPWI representation on the residence committee. So with the committee's consensus, we can remove that.
No, I'm not saying remove. I'm saying let's provide rationale so that we know, because a decision had been made. So we don't have to just remove for the sake. Honorable Kobe and Honorable Clark.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm assuming that the 2 designated support staff residing in the villages, that comes from Public Works, does it not, as it currently sits?
No. So the definition for designated support staff would be political staff appointed to support political parties, Parliament staff, and then staff appointed to assist members with disabilities.
Okay, that reside within the village. those are the ones that we are talking about. Okay, and when we have a representative from DPWI, the rationale was within the current model where DPWI is our custodian. And so having a member would have automatically made sense as an ex officio. But now our custodian is Parliament. Therefore, one representative from Parliament then can suffice because that is who takes care of our facilities. So I think I'm leaning towards agreeing with you about the removal of one representative. And we can maybe keep the number and say we add another MP who's residing in the village. And maybe we can keep the numbers, just so that voting still looks okay, and add a representation in terms of a number of MPs. I think there's a need to expand anyway. Thank you.
Honorable Ramluben. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chairperson. Yeah, I also think there's a need to have a discussion with DPWI and the Joint Standing Committee of Parliament to understand where each one's function is going to be falling in and whether they agree on these decisions, because these are important decisions and we haven't done that yet.
If my memory serves me very well, we did engage Public Works. Colleagues, if you can remind me. Did we not engage Public Works?
Yes, Honorable Chair, they've been with us all along.
Including today, right?
Yes, yes, Chair, they've been with us.
Yeah,
all along.
we've not left them behind.
Then what was the view on the custodianship?
No, we took it. Remember, we take decisions. We took a decision on custodianship to move from DPWI to Parliament. We were very firm on that decision. So we no longer second guess that. So the modalities is what we're trying to work out so that even how we're structuring, even beyond our term, it has to be clear how this thing is going to transition. If this setup is for transition, we must say so, while other things have been clarified. But that decision was made. Honorable Kobe?
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I stand to be corrected, but I believe that even with the policy decision that we've taken, we're with the executive, Mr. Ndo from the Department of Public Works. I believe that as well, letters have been sent to the minister repeatedly, in fact, about joining this meeting as well. I think Public Works has been thoroughly and I think over extensively invited into this process. And I think much like the board that has been at pains to get the Department of Public Works to sign off on their duties, the Department of Public Works has repeatedly not shown up. And this is why we have taken the decision to even amend the decisions in taking it the parliamentary route and not the executive route. I think that was clearly defined. There must not be a perception to the public or to this House that Department of Public Works has not been engaged on these very important matters. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think we are quite clear. Ramlubeng, you'll be the last.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was good that I come after Honorable Kobe on that explanation, because I think some of the gaps that exist in the Act and the functioning and the running of the boards, including residence committees, were equally identified by Public Works. And that's why there is an ad hoc as well in this space. But decisions ought to be taken and you must base them on the current status that we're finding ourselves in. Chair, I want to come in on the composition of the residence committee. And I want to also align my thinking with what Honorable Kobe would have indicated as well, that we ought to define the two designated support staff residing in villages. Currently is DPWI, who are reps, and again, one rep from DPWI, one rep from Parliament. Perhaps when there's a clearer clarity on Parliament and DPWI, when that transition happens, then it will indicate which one sits and which one doesn't. But I would want to urge the sitting chair, that the current number of MPs in these current residence committees in terms of numbers to be maintained as they are. Because of 3 reps or 4 reps, it for members who would be in the committee, it's too little. And whilst we are on that, we must define as well the voting status of those officials coming in those residencies. You don't find you are pulling the numbers, because currently in Acacia, I think it's 4, it's the top 4 and 5 additionals, or 4. I think it's a composition of 8 or 10 members of parliament. And I think we don't have an official, or we should have one that sits. But let's maintain the number and have officials that support the residence committees in terms of administrational and in terms of providing clarities or whatever that would be required, so that the MPs remain the custodians of taking decisions or amending certain things that ought to be done. So we must never find ourselves taking that power of members away and giving it to officials in order to balance numbers. So that is my submission, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. On the duration of office, I think we've clarified that maybe we must just be specific, and then the rest of the comments, I think we take them. We can move to the next one.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. So the next question is, should provisions be inserted on the determination of service levies, rental amounts, and transport fees? So no, it's actually the executive authority to Parliament. So the first option is to empower the executive authority to Parliament, after consultation with the board, to determine the service levies and rental amounts that residents in the villages are to be charged. And then empower the board to determine transport fees that residents in the villages are to be charged. So if we assign this responsibility to the board, then the Minister of Transport will no longer have any function under the draft bill. So this recommendation should be read together with a recommendation further on that says one could consider in the Act empowering the executive authority to Parliament to issue regulations on how the determination of service levies, rental amount, and transport fees should take place, to add in transparency and accountability in how those amounts are being determined. Yeah. The next question is, how and where should decisions about the allocation of housing units to Parliament and its associated structures take place? So we know at the moment we've got members of Parliament, there's no minimum eligibility criteria. So at the beginning of the term, political parties tell Parliament this is how many units our members need. DPWI then in turn, Parliament then in turn informs DPWI who makes the units available. That's slightly different. As it is currently phrased, the recommendation is for staff of political parties, staff of Parliament, there will be a minimum eligibility criteria of ordinarily residing outside Cape Town. So our option is, you can in the Act say how will the allocation of units take place to political parties and to Parliament, or in the Act you create a subcommittee. You create a subcommittee of the board called the Housing Allocations Committee, and all the Act will then say is this Housing Allocations Committee must determine how housing units will be allocated to political parties for the purpose of housing MPs of the NA and NCOP, which is allocated on a generally proportional criteria. So the proportionality requirement is built into the Act, but the housing allocation subcommittee will then, within that generally proportional criterion, decide, okay, what does it actually mean for this term of Parliament? Similarly to political parties, for the purpose of housing staff appointed to support the party in Parliament, that must also be generally proportional. The allocation of housing units to aid supporting members with disabilities, my argument is that should not be proportionally representative, it should be factual. Does a member have a disability and does that member require aid? The housing unit will then be made available. How the allocation will happen to Parliament for the purpose of housing staff appointed to support the political Parliament office bearers. The allocation of units to DPWI for the purpose of housing sessional workers, and to Parliament for the purpose of housing persons who will reside in the village at the discretion of the executive authority to Parliament. So we've heard the input today about the potential risk that allowing the executive authority to Parliament to have discretion in housing persons there. The discretion will have to be tied to the object of the act. Because one cannot at the moment, and I think some examples were even given of contractors, for example. So it would be difficult for an act to provide a exhaustive list of all the circumstances in which it might be reasonable for the executive authority to allow someone to reside in the villages, and where doing so is in accordance with the object and the aim of the act. So again, further on, there is the recommendation that the executive authority to Parliament must then issue regulations on how that decision-making and determination must happen as a way to include transparency. So it could be, for example, that the regulations, and drafting the regulations will not be part of a process now, but the regulations might say, for example, he's required to issue a notice to all political parties on any such determination that someone must reside in the village. It might include regulations on the duration that such a person might reside within the villages. So that's a recommendation to build in a safeguard where we do give the executive authority that discretion to house any other person. We can also say in the Act that the proportional allocation to political parties must include safeguards to ensure the provision of units to political parties whose representation does not reach 1% in the National Assembly. So yeah, so who will serve in the Housing Allocations Committee? I think just following on from our discussion so far, I'm now asking myself what would be the motivation for returning DPWI. So if members can allow me to get back to that, but definitely a representative from the Administration of Parliament, a representative from the Chief Whips Forum, okay, and a representative from the House chairpersons responsible for the villages. Is there anyone else? Yeah. So this is this would be a more operational with a very limited and specific function in terms of how will the general proportional requirements be implemented for that particular term of Parliament.
The next
Yeah.
one.
I suspect there might be.
Sorry, there's a hand. Yes, Honorable Clerk.
Sorry, Chair, just on this last point we've discussed, you speak about contractors having housing within the parks. Look, and I agree that there's probably one person that has to deal with the 24-hour service where a geyser bursts at 2 o'clock in the morning, for instance, and your house is flooded, and you have to deal with that. But I think there must certainly be put a threshold in terms of that aspect. You can't just have 10 contractors living in the park, but certainly one for emergency purposes.
Thank you. That recommendation is noted. Can we move to the next one?
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So the recommendation is in respect of which matters should Could regulations be issued to further regulate the Act? And who should regulate such issues? The first one, members will recall, I posed the question earlier, so if the recommendations of 20 March 26 are implemented, what is left for the minister? What functions remain? One of the functions would be the determination of any other places of accommodation to be declared as parliamentary villages. So regulations could be issued on the process that the minister must follow in determining any such place of accommodation as villages, including the stakeholders who must have input on that proposal, and including the role that the board and executive authority of Parliament must have. The process to be followed and factors to be taken into account into making a determination on service levies and rental amounts, that is incorrectly placed. That would also fall under regulations issued by the executive authority to Parliament. So what is the regulations that the executive authority to Parliament could promulgate to further regulate the Act? The first one, the process to be followed in making and factors to take into account in making a determination on transport levies and any other fees. The executive authority could issue the rules, conditions, and general information applicable to the villages as regulations. The recommendation is also that the executive authority could issue regulations making the completion of an annual occupancy audit by Parliament a mandatory requirement. Regulations could be issued for the process that must be followed by the executive authority and the minister responsible for safety and security to formalize arrangements in respect of entry into and safety in the villages. And then the process to be followed and factors to take into account by the Housing Allocation Subcommittee in determining the allocation of residential units to political parties, Parliament, and DPWI. Then the last question in relation to legislative development, and this is quick. How can the Act be aligned to accepted legislative drafting practice and conventions? Because it is an old Act, the Act still makes reference to a Minister of Public Works, for example. In modern drafting practice, ministers are not referred to by their portfolio, so that makes the law sustainable in the event that the portfolio is transferred or the portfolio changes. So in the draft bill, one would rather refer to the cabinet member responsible for public works and infrastructure. And you would use the same formulation then for the cabinet member responsible for safety and security, finance, and transport, where this minister still assigned a function in this bill. Based on the current recommendations, that Minister of Transport no longer has a function. Then lastly, proposals for policy or framework development that must take place alongside legislative development. The first one is that it's recommended that SAPS should recommend to Cabinet that parliamentary villages be included in the scope of the risk management support system. Second policy recommendation is that a governance framework must be formalized between SAPS and the board, amongst other, making provision for residents of the villages to make use of SAPS resources at the villages to report a crime and have documents commissioned, the minimum number of SAPS members to be deployed at the villages, the implementation of improvements to physical security measures at the villages, the implementation of improved security checks on entry and exit, the establishment of centralized monitoring rooms, the frequency at which safety and security assessments is to be undertaken, coordination with the local SAPS to implement the Safer Schools program at Acacia Park, and ensuring that e-hailing drivers entering the villages have the necessary valid forms of identification. Members will recall when we had that oversight visit with the parks, even SAPS was saying the governance arrangements between them and Department of Public Work is not quite set in stone or formalized in any way. So that is what that recommendation attempts to speak to. The second policy recommendation is that DPI, together with the board, so here the committee can decide Do we want DPI to start with this process? Or are we saying once the new act comes into effect? But there's a need to review the villages board that is clearly, the villages rules, which is clearly outdated. So reviewing the rules, like I said, to make provision for residents' complaints to be heard directly by the board if there's no functioning residents committee, and by the executive authority to Parliament where there's no board. It suggested that the villages rule must make the requirement to present yourself for an annual occupancy audit a mandatory requirement for all residents. Making the registration of criminal complaints mandatory for all residents and requiring that domestic workers who are residents in the villages be registered with the UIF. So when we had the oversight visit, the question of the eviction of the domestic workers was also discussed by members. And if members was recalled, part of the outcome of that discussion was, or rather members were not in favor of that approach, but rather saying, improve living conditions and ensure that domestic workers are registered with UIF as the law requires. The last set of policy recommendations speaks to the development of a policy on the provision of accommodation to designated support staff. So the policy must include directives on the following. The first one, being ordinarily resident outside of Cape Town as being the minimum eligibility requirement, with the exception of aid supporting members with disabilities. Giving political parties represented in Parliament discretion in determining any additional eligibility criteria the party will apply. Giving Secretary to Parliament discretion in determining any additional eligibility criteria that Parliament will apply. It must include directives on transparency and accountability in housing allocation. For example, it might require a declaration form by a staff member to declare that they are ordinarily resident outside of Cape Town to make sure that they do meet the minimum eligibility requirement. And also the minimum distance that designated support staff, the minimum distance that primary residents must be away from the parliamentary precinct in order to be eligible for accommodation in parliamentary villages. So that brings me to the end of the recommendations, Chair. The Honourable Dagmo did talk about at the beginning of the session on the issue of budget. And yes, so the budget will follow the function, Chair. Hence our invitation to the Minister of Finance as well to give us his view. Chair, you will recall in the letter to the committee from the Minister of Transport, in the letter to the committee from the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Finance explicitly gives his support for the recommendation that Parliament must take over the custodian functions of the custodial responsibilities in respect of the immovable assets within the parliamentary villages. So the budget will follow the function. Similarly, all of the assets and liabilities, the rights and responsibilities of DPWI would then transfer to the board. And your act will ordinarily make provision for that transfers. Then yes, Chair. So the only policy decision that is left, either for now or for when we reconvene to adopt the report, is my question about, do we want to retain the relationship of dependency between the primary resident and the person who stays in the unit with them? Thank you, Honourable Chair.
Thank you very much. I think that was quite excellent. The one thing that, in my view, we have not covered, which is an integral part of, which should be an integral part of this bill, is around the facet of the transport facet. We've not really, there is no dedicated section where we talk about it. There's a transport for members, transport for the kids, and how that gets to be managed. I think we cannot leave it out. So you don't have to for now, maybe you just have to consider that aspect. Before we conclude, I would like to allow a DPWI, Parliament, SAPS, I don't know who else I might be leaving behind before you will conclude as members. I want to allow you colleagues to express yourself, having heard what are the proposals, and then what is your take, so that because this is a workshop, it's not a one-way, so it's an all-encompassing. I'd like to give you 5 minutes each just to raise whatever issues that you want to raise on your part, and then the technical team and legally will conclude once we're done. I'm starting with DPWI.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Honorable Chairperson, honorable members. Tembela from Public Works. Chair, we take note of all the inputs, the proposals. We've noted them, Chair, and we will relay them to the senior executive managers and the office of the minister for the department to provide its, I would say, its input, Chair. But we take note of all the inputs, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, SAPS.
Good afternoon, Chairperson and honorable members. With regard to the inputs, just from our side, I think we have given our inputs mostly on the meeting that we had the 20th, and we take cognizance of these inputs. I think from our side, the only matter that we would like to highlight is with regard to the point on point 11 with regard to making the registration of a criminal complaint mandatory for residents. Now, as it is, we cannot force any residents to open a criminal case. Obviously, as SAPS, we have to investigate if the case is obviously opened. But within South Africa, we cannot compel anyone to open a case. We cannot force anyone to open a case. It's a choice if a person wants to open a case. Having said that, obviously, if it is, like I just want to reiterate, if it is open, we obviously have to investigate it. So that is the only point, and the other points, we are quite satisfied with that. We will also do take it up with our divisional commissioner with regard to the REMAS document, and then that has to go obviously to cabinet for the inclusion of the parliamentary villages within our REMAS process. That will be all. Thank you, honorable members.
Thank you very much, Parliament. Designated persons who are here.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and honorable members. We note that the point relating to the object for the amendment, that it has been well captured, that the act itself must align to the needs of the members, and that strategic alignment is quite important. And I think that's the underlying reason why there's a shift from Public Works as a custodian to Parliament, and that it's not about being sensational, but rather to say we align to even Parliament strategic objectives. Flowing from that, there's also a reference to section 4.1 of GIAMA to say that the legislation brings into effect, by extension, the taking over of the custodial functions. And I think that's an important section because it takes away the need for the minister to assign Parliament the functions in terms of section 18.1, which may be a lengthy process on its own and complicated. And if section 4.1 comes into effect, and then that there's this legislation that gives Parliament the power to become the custodian and the executive authority by extension, it means then we don't even have to mention section 19.1 of GIAMA, because once we are the custodian, we take the responsibility of the custodian, because section 18.12 says that upon acceptance of those functions, we will act as if we are the custodian, and then we'll take the liability that flows with that responsibility in that course of acting. Chair, I think there's also a need to make transitional arrangements because There's also little issues that may still be lingering. An example may be the issue of the land ownership that Honorable Dagmo raised. You may take the responsibilities, but the issue of land ownership may create complexities on its own because it may limit you in terms of the functions as a custodian. Because Section 13 of GIAMA clearly makes reference to the functions of the custodian, and one of which is to the common law functions of property management. And there are certain things that we may not be able to do if the land ownership question is not clear, and that must be addressed as a matter of urgency. And I think DPWI must assist in that regard so that we don't operate from a vacuum. Dispute resolution mechanism must also be included in the revision itself because it's another important issue that we should not take for granted. And Chair, also flowing from the fact that we're saying it's alignment to the objects of Parliament and the strategic imperatives of Parliament, Section 6 to Section 12 of GIAMA, they outline the issue of the need for strategic planning in respect of asset management. And we don't even have to make reference to that because if we are the custodian, by extension, we have to follow the requirements of GIAMA from Section 6 to 12, which talks about the custodian immovable asset management plan. And if we have that plan, it will make justification for Treasurer to make allocations to Parliament, because the plan itself will say, these are the priorities of Parliament in terms of accommodation. This is how assets are going to be managed. These are the priorities in terms of projects, whether it's maintenance or CapEx. Flowing from there, this is the budget that is required, and Treasurer has to honor that in respect of the custodian immovable asset management plan and user asset management plan, and not just to say that because we are playing the function of the custodian, money must flow to us. Treasurer can only give us money if we have alignment to Section 6 to Section 12 of GIAMA. I think that covers it, Chair. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yes, I would like to turn to members. I know that others will be leaving now, but just few issues. I think there's general agreement on the provision for transition. I think you will help us to factor that so that in the final report, including dispute resolution mechanism. Now, as you think about it, and then as the members think about their final conclusion, so we need to know, after this workshop, what is the next step? We must outline the remaining steps, timeframes, and the work that must be done by the ad hoc so that we can conclude, because between now and August, we must have a final product that encompasses everything. So think about that, because you will conclude. I want to allow members to have a final concluding remarks and then come to you just on the commitments of the things that we've done, and then we can outline the program. Honorable Clerk, Honorable Van Zyl, I know that you covered. Honorable Ramulben, covered. Honorable Mvana.
Thanks, the final and the conclusion. It's a request to SAPS to make sure that their landline in villages are working, because we've got a problem of intercom that is not working. And it depends on them, the issue of the landline. Thank you. That's my conclusion.
Honorable Langwini.
No, thank you, Chair. I'm covered. Just one, maybe perhaps. Last time that we had a meeting at Pelican Park, we were promised from SAPS extra personnel at the parks. I just want to find out, was that effective in the parks for the extra personnel? Thank you.
Is there an institution we are leaving behind? I don't want to leave anyone, because everyone here representing certain institutions must come to us. Yes, madam. If you can just introduce yourself and where you're coming from. I don't want to make a mistake and leave people outside, so that we can proceed.
It's Linda Harper, and I'm also a representative from the Office of the Secretary, representing the Office of the Secretary. So I think we've already given considerable input to the draft, and I can certainly see it coming out in the documents that were presented. I think just from my side, and it's a matter that Honorable Clark did raise, we didn't get to discuss it, was that we have been tasked to look at making a presentation to the Chief Whips Forum and to the Member Support Forum around alternative models for housing, one of which is the housing allowance. And that meeting will take place, I think it's early in May, between the two forums. So I think perhaps we can just make sure that there's some representation from the ad hoc committee at that meeting, so that it's not a separate engagement that's happening, that really is talking to the housing model for members. And then I will chat to the colleagues about the definition of proportional representation when it comes to determining houses allocated to parties. We've had some challenges with that in the past, but that's all from my side. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Kobe.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I think largely covered and agree with the sentiments, especially the last speaker. Chair, in one of the presentations, they said we currently don't have a dedicated full-time administrator to manage the day-to-day operations. I believe we have Mr. Tembela here, unless if I'm wrong. But if we don't have, when we conclude this meeting, Chair, can we have a dedicated someone who deals with the day-to-day runnings of the village, just until all the work's completed, but we need someone who takes care of our villages continually. Thanks, Chair, but otherwise I'm covered.
Thank you very much. Legal.
Chairperson, so we first would like to acknowledge that there have been a lot of positives that come out of this workshop. We have agreed to a lot of the policy decisions, which is what we as drafters need to draft our bill. So in drafting the bill, it would take us, we had agreed to a 5-week period to draft the bill, but obviously policy decisions haven't been finalized yet. There are a few research topics, particularly around the finance aspects of villages, that myself, legal services and research has to finalize. So we would like to request the committee at least possibly 2 weeks to finalize that. I think we have to liaise also with Parliament and Mr. Mashiko regarding how functions and budgets, and also discuss with the department and have the department allow the department some time to respond to the aspects regarding finance. Be that as it may, once that is finalized, further deliberations on the bill will take place, because as soon as legal services drafts the bill and presents the bill to the committee has a second bite at the cherry with regards to deliberations, because the bill will only then be finalized and published. And following publication, there should be further deliberations that will ensue, because the public will have an opportunity to comment on the bill. So I just thought at this point, I would like to, if there are any fears that members have that this is the final opportunity that they will be contributing to policy decisions, this isn't the final opportunity. We are still very early in the process of finalizing our bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anneke.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So following on from what Mr. Lannestakler has said, if we then build in 2 weeks for the research, we would then on the it's the 8th of May. Okay, so if we can be afforded just under 2 weeks, Chair, we will then have the next document to be produced would be the committee's policy review report, which will essentially be the discussion document in which all the recommendations of the members today have been effected. Now, because of the homework we now need to do in terms of what is the Financial Management of Parliament Act says, amongst other, we just need to build in the time for between myself and legal services to do the research. Long story short, Chair, we would be able to then by the 6th of May give the revised document that will eventually become our policy review report so that we can, on the 8th of May, adopt that report. From the 8th of May, if we build in the 5-week process that legal services need to draft the bill, we will then, on the 12th of June, consider the first version of the committee bill. So that actually fits in nicely, Chair, because we'll then consider the draft committee bill on the 12th of June. We will consider the final draft bill on the 19th of June. So then what will happen is, conveniently then, Chair, while Parliament then has the June break, the draft bill will then be issued for public consult, for public inputs. So we then won't lose committee time because it is time that would in any event have to be dedicated to gazetting the bill and getting public input on that.
Thank you very much. I think that is quite clear. We are fine. Yes. Yes. I don't know, media team, because there is a question I want to ask, which is pertinent but not relevant to this process. I don't know how we manage that because the meeting is closed. Who can assist us with that? I want to ask it in a meeting, but in committee, if there's anything like that. The cameras are on. We need to ask something in committee. Just bear with me for another 2-3 minutes. We should be done. But thank you very much, colleagues. I think this is helpful, and then it will also help us to plan. While the team is dealing with that other issue, I just want to implore members of the committee, let's try and be consistent. This ad hoc committee was established by Parliament, by yourselves. So you can't have other priorities when we have put forward the program. We know all of us are making sacrifices because of the work we're doing in different committees, but this is a very important work and progress has been made. I'm just urging members who are here to continue to be consistent so that we can conclude this work. And finally, I think that as we do this work, we also we must find ways of briefing different political parties who are represented here, so that when we go to the House, we don't have a confusion about small things. So anyone who's got any issue you must raise, you can either win it here or lose it here in a meeting, so that we don't go to Parliament with a report to go and confuse with our politics. This is about the well-being of members of Parliament far beyond our time. So it's important that we deal with those issues so that no one must feel oppressed. Every questions must be answered. Our professionals are here, and we are also here as politicians to engage so that we get the best ideas that must formulate this draft bill that we're talking about, which is about the welfare of future MPs in the Republic. And this work has not been done since 1998. So you can tell it's a very important work. It's not something you must take for granted. It might not be that ad hoc that keeps you on TV every day where you ask people questions. It's a very important ad hoc about the future of the MPs. Thank you very much. Yes, SAPS?
Thank you, Chair. I believe there's a question that I must answer. Chair, if you remember when we done the presentation at Pelican Park with regard to the concerns about the villages, there was concerns from members, honorable members, and our divisional commissioner has then promised that we will craft an intervention plan. We have, in the meantime, we have done so. We have to just, there's certain things that we have to just finalize with Public Works, but it's ready. So if the committee then actually determines a date when we should come back and actually present the intervention plan, we will do so. But just on the question with regard to the capacitation of more members at the villages, unfortunately, we have not done so. In the last meeting, we have indicated that we are busy with the process of lateral appointments. We are still busy with that process. We have had our interviews. We still need to do the formal appointments of this process. And once that has been concluded, we hope to finalize it in May. Once that process has been concluded, we will then do capacitate, especially Acacia Park, which is the biggest park. We will then do extra deployments at that village. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we together have officially adjourned the meeting. Please note the important dates, 8 May, 12 June, and 19 June. Very critical. We will not accept apologies from members because we need to do this work and finalize it. The issue now that they've switched off the cameras, it's an issue that we are dealing with because majority of the members here are also members of the board, whether it's still there or not there. There was a build program almost a year ago. We were shown in one of the board meeting the 113 houses that are going to be built there. So nobody has ever told us what is happening. When we are asked, because we gave feedback to the village, we have no idea. Can we ask Public Works to take us into confidence so that we have a proper report back? If we must go back to our people and tell them that it's no longer happening, let's hear that so that we have at least a concrete things from yourselves. We'll give you just 5 minutes to explain to us where is the delay. We don't want. We are not talking procurement. We want a service provider on site doing the work that you showed us. Just talk to us about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, Chair, I would like to confirm that the project is going ahead as reported. The procurement process in terms of the adjudication was completed on the 27th of March. The contractor is envisaged to, the project is envisaged to commence in September. Just one moment. Thank you, Chair. Sorry for that. The site handover is envisaged to take place on the 6th of November 2026. But indeed, Chair, it's going ahead. Thank you.
What is that? You've concluded an appointment in March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, for 8 months. What are you going to be doing?
Thank you, Chair. The program can be emailed, Chair. However, there's a design phase